So one of the exercises that I myself use regularly, and we talk about a lot in the book, is something called the Transitional Pause. And really I use this exercise to help me transition from one activity to another. So often we're busy and we're rushing around, or we're doing multiple tasks during the course of the day. And it's very common that we might sort of be bringing some of the stuff from our earlier part of the day or earlier interactions into the next moment. So this is really a way to help you clear some of that stuff, acknowledge maybe the impact of the day or the things that you've just come from, and then set your intention for how you would like things to be in the future. So I'd invite you, if you wish, to join me in a short mindfulness of the posture exercise. And when I go into this exercise, I try to orient my body into a posture that captures this essence of being both alert and relaxed. So typically that might include sort of a little bit of a shuffle to elongate the spine and make sure that the feet are planted on the ground. Sort of maybe imagining that I'm just slightly pulling the ears up a little bit, elongating through the spine, but allowing the muscles to be relaxed. So the spine is alert and the muscles and everything else around it relaxed. And the reason we go into this posture is because there's this bi-directional communication between the body and the brain at all times. And so if I'm asking my mind to be mindful and have this quality of alert relaxation in the space of the mind, it really helps if my body is in that kind of a posture as well. It's informing my brain. And so if we're kind of sitting like this, trying to meditate, and the brain is going to go, well, I'm relaxed, you know, let's just relax and fall asleep. Similarly, if we're kind of sitting like this, a little bit too alert, a little bit too hyper-vigilant almost, then it's going to be difficult for us to have that quality of gentleness and playfulness when we meet experiences in the mind. And if you wish to, you can close your eyes. You may not feel comfortable to do that, but then the suggestion is to just minimize the visual stimulation and the visual cortex, just kind of drop that down a bit by just picking a point to rest the gaze. And inviting you to begin to sense the body. And this may be sensing the contact that the body makes with the chair, qualities of hardness or softness. Perhaps becoming aware of the tactile sensations of the clothes. And really setting the intention to be here and now, using these sensations of the body as an anchor for the attention. It's very easy for us to be drawn into thinking about the future or going back to the past. And the body really is a great aid, a friend even, to help us be here and now. It's really feeling that solidity of bottom on the chair, feet on the floor, hands on the lap. And leaving the busyness of the day and the journey here, the hustle and bustle of Leicester Square, leaving that at the door in order to be fully here and now. And the pause is really the starting point of the sort of 5-part mindfulness formula, almost, as it were, that I've chosen to write about in my book. And the origins of it was really working in the healthcare setting and working as a clinical psychologist, wanting to try to find a way to communicate to people what this concept of mindfulness was all about, because the terminology can be quite problematic. You know, is mindfulness a state or a trait? Is it a training? Is it a practice? Is it a type of thing that the brain does or the mind does? There's a lot of confusion about it. And the definition that I like to work with is one offered by somebody called John Kabat-Zinn. He really is sort of the father of secular mindfulness, as we call it. which is mindfulness training techniques which have their origins in the Buddhist traditions, but which have been taken and kind of reformulated a little bit so that they can be offered in mainstream settings such as healthcare settings and hospitals. His definition is different from a Buddhist definition, but it captures quite a few elements which I think are important, and also from a cognitive neuroscience point of view seem to really capture what's going on. So he defines mindfulness as a type of awareness that emerges when certain conditions are met. And those conditions are, we need to pay attention on purpose, moment by moment, and without judgment. Yeah, so anybody that says, oh, mindfulness is like really nice and it's relaxation, I point them to that definition and I say, well, actually your brain is doing quite a lot. Yeah, paying attention on purpose, very deliberately, with intention, moment by moment. So there's that quality of needing to monitor what's happening on an ongoing basis as things unfold. And then the whole thing under this umbrella of non-judging. And again, that requires some monitoring, because the minute we jump into the space of the body and mind, often the first thing we meet is a lot of judging. So there's this active process of checking in. Am I being gentle? Am I being too hard on myself? Is it helpful if I'm judging at this moment? And then particularly when we get to the realm of, you know, our emotional life, it's like, well, I feel sad, and then I judge myself for feeling sad. Is that helpful? Does that make the sadness easier to manage? And mostly we find that it doesn't. So I took this definition and I really tried to unpack it. And I thought, well, how can I explain this to people that have never really heard of mindfulness before, but maybe have been kind of getting a sense, oh, there's this buzz about mindfulness, and I want to kind of do it with my patients, or I want to bring it into my clinic, or I want to learn it for myself. So I started to unpack this definition, and from that came up with this kind of 5-part framework, which then sort of took on a life of its own, as these things sometimes do. And then initially it started as a bit of a crib sheet to help people think about how they could be a bit more aware or mindful in their day-to-day life, and eventually realized that I had quite a resource of teaching materials around each of the topics, and it became the book, which is somewhere. So I'll talk briefly through those 5 themes. So the first theme really is this question about pausing. And for me, it's something about creating enough space to really see what's going on. Because if we're hurtling around at 1,000,000 miles an hour, there's not really much chance for our brain to gather enough data for us to see really clearly about the relationships between emotions and thoughts and reactions and actions. So in the chapter about pause, it really is just an exploration of that topic and how we might begin to pay more attention to the pacing of our lives, of our work, of our speech, of our interactions, of how we spend our time, and wherever possible, try to do things maybe a bit slower. You don't have to go to extremes and kind of do super slow motion walking, but you might become aware of your automatic speed and then choose to interrupt that consciously and say, well, hang on a minute, you know, do I need to be walking this fast? Or do I need to be running up the escalator on the tube? Or why am I doing that? You know, it's really becoming curious about the speed at which you do things. And a real place where you can work with this is around food and eating. Because I think in our modern culture there is this tendency to shovel the food in our mouths as fast as possible. And, you know, this has repercussions for our physical health as well. And the style of the book really, and my approach, is really about inviting people to find their own way to practice. So for some people, a pause might be, you know, regularly sitting on a cushion like that for 20 minutes or 45 minutes a day or once a week or whatever, and, you know, that's their way of pausing. You know, they deliberately create a space where they can slow things down in order to then begin to see, well, how is the mind and what's arising and what's happening in the body and what are the things that are going on that I can attend to and learn from. But for others, that really may not be appealing. or it may not be possible. And again, my clinical work was often with clients who had very distressing and confused mental states, and asking them to sit on a cushion with their eyes closed for 20 minutes might even be considered quite a cruel thing to do, because they're very confused and the thoughts may be very distressing. So I was really then beginning to think about how to help those people that may not be able to pause in that way. And the idea then was about thinking, well, what are some small things that you can do where you attend to the pacing, or where you might deliberately slow down? And some of the things that people have come up with, are pretty innovative and creative. So I had one student, he was doing slow motion answering his phone. So his phone would ring or buzz, and his practice for the week, literally it's like, well, what one small thing do you want to play around with? So, well, this is what I'm going to do. Every time my phone rings, I'm just going to go almost like slow motion to answer my phone. And just in doing that, actually some quite significant and deep insights arose around his sense of feeling that he needed to be there for people all the time, kind of on tap, on call all the time to other people's demands. Some insights about, well, what would it mean to sort of push back or have boundaries or not respond to people immediately. In trying to break into this automatic habit, actually he discovered how strong it was. And that sometimes can be frightening when we start to become more aware of the things that we're doing. We sort of think, well, hang on a minute, like, where did this come from? Or why am I doing this? Do I need to answer the phone now? Or actually, I'm doing something. I want my attention to be here. So no, I'm not going to answer the phone. And so all this really arose purely from an intention to very slowly answer his phone. And these are the sorts of things that we can play around with, and it's a type of mindfulness, and it's a mindfulness that we use when we're in motion and around in our lives. The other interesting thing from a neuroscience point of view about why attention to pacing and interrupting this automatic speed at which we do things is that we know that this engages a region of the right frontal lobe that's involved in self-control. So when we're working with movements, we're kind of engaging this motor inhibitory centers of the brain. But they lie adjacent to, and they're intimately connected to, the same bits of the brain that we use to inhibit our cognitive thinking patterns. And so those of you that have maybe done a bit of mindfulness before know that one of the things that we're doing is we're learning to observe when the mind is wandering. And we're kind of disciplining it a little bit and saying, no, I don't want you just meandering all over the place, having chains of thought and thinking and memory and association. I'm just going to say, hang on a minute. I want to be here, not over here, lost in my daydream. And the minute we see this chain of thought going, and we're able to say, oh, hang on a minute, no, we're engaging this cognitive inhibitory network. And there's some research to show that if we train in the motor domain to support and strengthen this ability to inhibit and pull back, there's a knockover, or he calls it inhibitory spillover effect. This is the work of Matthew Lieberman. He has a nice article called The Brain's Braking System, where he talks about these different aspects of inhibition in the brain. But some of the experimental work shows if we train in the motor domain, this kind of drip feeds into the other domains and can help us and can support us. So I believe, even if we're just doing small things, we're doing something quite critical about interrupting automatic programs and learning how to do this kind of pulling back, which will help us. So that's the pause. And the second one is intention. So again, this is a massive topic, and it goes really all the way up into the kind of spiritual domain and some pretty big questions, intention at the biggest level. Why am I here? What is the purpose of me being on this planet at this time? But we can also have smaller intentions, which is, how do I want to relate to myself and to others? How do I want to be in this world? And then really even at a lower level, when we sit down to practice mindfulness, whether it's seated or moving, we set the intention. What's my intention? Okay, for the next 5 minutes, I will pay attention to the breath. We know that when we've learned a movement and we've kind of practiced a movement, roughly 500 milliseconds before I'm even aware that I'm reaching for this book, my brain has already laid down a kind of template of what it expects to happen in terms of the sensory feedback that my brain should be receiving if my intention is pick up that book. And if everything goes to plan, as I reach for the book, the actual movement is being compared to the expected template of the movement, and it's kind of going, yep, 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 oh yeah, on track, yep, 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 oh, alarm, alarm, you're not going to the book, you're not going to the book. Yeah? So if everything goes smoothly, I'm not even aware of it. I just pick up the book, I can move my hands and my body around, no problem. But within this system, there's this kind of ability to kind of alert us when we're not in line with our intentions. And when I was reading about this, I thought, well, this may be helpful, you know, if we're thinking about what happens in a meditation when our intention is to be on the breath. You know, if we set the intention to be on the breath, the task is just to watch the breath. So there's this expectation of what is the sensory information that I should be recording and receiving if my intention is met. So if I then start thinking about my grandmother, or about is there going to be a tube strike, or about some nice memory of when I was on my holidays, this little alarm bell can go, ding, 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 Tamara, hello, alert, you're not on the breath anymore, you need to come back to the breath. Yeah? So this is why it's important that we just don't kind of sit down and be a bit like wishy-washy and kind of go, oh yeah, I'm going to meditate now, yeah, meditation, yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, it's really helpful if we can kind of have that process of saying, okay, brain, this is what I want to do. Now, I may not be successful, and this is kind of where the gentleness comes in, but really by setting the intention, I believe, helps us to then more promptly detect when we're off track, which means we can then more promptly come back to where we want to be. And we can really play around with this in the movement system. You know, the intention to change our posture, the intention to move from walking to stillness, from stillness to walking, walking to running, you know, sitting up in the bed, you know, training ourselves to detect almost before we do it the intention to move. And this, I think, is a really great training because, again, what happens in the motor system really is replicated in these other systems of the brain. And, you know, I personally don't have experience of this, but I've heard of Buddhist practitioners who are able to detect the intention of a thought before it arises. Yeah, these are really people that have practiced a lot more than myself. But, you know, for me, I then think, okay, well, where is it in my day-to-day life that I can just be more alert to my intention either to move my body and kind of clocking in, which is like, okay, I'm about to reach. Okay, I'm about to reach. Oh, yeah, okay, now I'm reaching. Yeah, okay, I'm about to swipe my Oyster card. Ah, yes, here I am swiping my Oyster card. And then through this practices, you know, maybe getting some insights when we're in a kind of thinking pattern, or when we're having an emotional reaction, or when we're about to interact with somebody, just clocking in and saying, what is my intention, actually, when I go into this meeting with my supervisor? What is my intention when I pick up the phone to talk to my friend who's, you know, having difficulties with a husband or a partner or something? And as time goes by, if you keep attending to this and you keep asking this question, you often start by finding that you've got kind of quite complex and grandiose intent. Well, I'm going to fix this thing. I want this whole thing fixed, and I'm going to blah, 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 and I'm going to offer all this advice, and I'm going to really tell her like how she needs to be, and da 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 da. And actually, yet with practice, it just seems to strip back to more the essentials, which is my intention is to listen, and then sometimes I have to say to me, my intention is to keep my mouth shut for as long as I can, because I know that my habit is to do this. And again, this kind of the simplicity of the intention, I think, comes with more and more attention to it. So, you know, what's my intention for today? To be gentle. What's my intention in this clinical session with one of my clients? To be present. And I set that intention, it's like words in my mind, and I'm saying, okay, that is my intention. And so then the minute I'm not present, I come back more quickly. And I found that really helpful, especially in this more interpersonal domain where we can often be swamped, I think, with some of our kind of personal habits and conditioning. And this is a little bit of an antidote to that. What's my intention? Be gentle. What's my intention? Be quiet. What's my intention? Pay attention. So it's a deep, deep topic, and also something that we really work with a lot in Tai Chi. This ability that we can develop to move our minds around the body and really get into that preceding bit of programming of the brain before the body moves. So the third one then is attention. So if we pause and we set our intention, then we need to be alert to attention. And again, a really rich topic. A lot of literature within the cognitive sciences about different ways of that we can use our attention, the different subsets of the attentional system, all of which are trained in many of the meditation and mindfulness practices. But the three particular ones that I talk about in the book are, we have this ability to focus, sustain our attention, and intention kind of supports and underpins that. We have the ability to shift our attention, move it around. Sometimes that's voluntary. We choose, okay, now I'm here, now I'm here, now I'm here. Sometimes the attention is captured by things, like sounds, for example. So I'm aware, I'm talking to you, I'm listening, I'm looking at you, but periodically I feel that my mind goes to sounds outside there. So these are called variously, got a number of names, but often they're called the alerting, the orienting, and then the executive attentional subsystems. And there's emerging evidence from the neuroimaging research to show that the brain regions responsible for these different parts of the attention network can grow and change as a result of a meditation practice. I was just teaching at King's today the MSc in neuroimaging, and was speaking about a paper by some colleagues in the States where they did some neuroimaging studies of really experienced meditation practitioners. So these are lamas that have been living up in the Himalayas. The scientist was granted access to them through the Dalai Lama. So really, amazing opportunity to study these minds that have been training their attention in pretty, ideal conditions, actually. Because if you really want to train your attention and you really want to see clearly what's happening in the space of the mind, it is helpful to not be living in the busy, modern, urban environment because it's so distracting. And so they're up in caves in the Himalayas, they're there practicing 18 hours a day or so, for 30 years. These are really attentional experts, the Olympic athletes of attention, as it were. And we see in these individuals that there are changes in the structure and the function of regions of this attentional network, such that they really have this fine ability to know where is their mind, where is their attention. And of course this is appealing to people that are wanting to study harder or work more or be more productive or concentrate more. And again, your intentions could be many and varied. Some people want to be able to do it to allow themselves to be in this position of spiritual enlightenment. Some people want to do it as an antidote to the way that our modern society kind of depletes our attention, actually, particularly technology and the internet and our phones and all the rest of it. Others want to improve. They want to be able to study for longer or to think more deeply or to allow themselves the ability to kind of go deeper into the space of the mind without being pulled away. And again, the moving body and movement, I believe, can really help us to train this ability because naturally, when we're learning a new movement, we have to engage this same attentional subsystems. Remember, if you can, learning to ride a bike or even drive a car. I remember when I was learning to drive, I came quite late to driving. I was an adult. And, it was a nightmare. It was like, oh my God, I have to pay attention to so many things, and the wheel and this and looking and all the rest of it, and the wheel and the pedals, and it just felt like it was going to be too much. The attention, you really have to be paying attention. And yet, once you've learned how to drive, you can do it really hardly paying attention at all, completely on automatic pilot. So within the movement system, we have a very nice model of how to kind of pay attention in an over-controlled way and how quickly it becomes automatized. And so then we can de-automatize it, maybe by going very slowly, or maybe by just learning a new movement that challenges us a little bit. And then we can see how these processes evolve in the mind. And again, I've found that very helpful myself, and students have reported that using the moving body as the training tool has really helped them to clock into this in a way that then generalizes to the other parts of the practice. Yeah, pausing, setting your intention, and becoming alert to attention. What will happen is you will definitely begin to see patterns emerging in the way that you think and feel and how these things are related. And this, for me, then kind of captures the essence of maybe what we're interested in terms of mindfulness training as a self-development tool. You know, really beginning to see clearly some of the conditioning that we've brought with us, probably from when we were small, related to probably the environments that we grew up in and the messages that we were given when we were a youngster, when our brains were really plastic and we were looking with big, big eyes at the people that were caring for us and understanding about life and emotions and how the world works. With this training, we begin to see some of that. And the chance here is to kind of say, is this habit helping me still? Or is this something that's kind of getting in the way or just draining me from energy because I'm just going round and round and, you know. And I call these the mental monkeys. And, you know, this is kind of terminology that we use in Kung Fu to describe the mental states and the mental patterns that come out when we're trying to learn movements or when we're in postures that begin to give us a little bit of discomfort or pain. You know, suddenly we see how the mind reacts. And often we're most interested in how does my mind react when things are not how I want them to be. And again, thinking about this, well, I don't need to really react in any way if I'm successful. But when I do need to react is when things don't go to plan. And it's like, what do I do then? What do I do when I'm challenged? And I think it's no mistake that in the clinical setting, these trainings are really being used for working with patient populations where there's a high degree of suffering and distress. Because these individuals are kind of saying, I see really clearly that what I'm doing is not helping me. And I'm really willing to go in and investigate these habits and patterns and find out what can I do differently. But it takes repeated observation of the phenomena under multiple conditions. And again, here I make a case for mindful movement and weaving mindfulness more throughout your day, because you can get a lot of insights from sitting on the cushion. But often when you're on the cushion, you're not provoked by other people and you're not irritated by your family or your partner or your work colleagues. You know, this is kind of when you need that stuff, when you're right out there in the world. So yeah, so we get to know our mental monkeys, and you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, this judging monkey is often a very prevalent one, particularly in Western society. These kind of perfectionist ideas, these ideas that things should always be good and nice and happy and pleasant and relaxing, and when we're not in those states, we have this phrase in psychology, you know, low frustration tolerance. And I think that's something that's experienced a lot, particularly by our young people in our culture. They're not really able to tolerate when things are a little bit difficult. They kind of collapse. And mindfulness is teaching us, well, let's look and see, how does your mind respond when things are not how you want them to be? This is where you're going to learn. And then you have a choice. Mindfulness gives us the choice, and we kind of say, oh, look, I'm doing that thing. Wow, I'm doing that. Am I still doing that thing? Okay, yes, still doing that thing. But at a certain point, through this repeated observation, actually what we understand happens is that these kind of neural superhighways become dimmer and dimmer and dimmer, until eventually there's a point where we sort of say, actually, I see that I'm about to go into this reactivity, and I'm going to choose not to do that. And when that moment comes, it's actually quite sweet, because you just think, wow, that was really stressful, and I kind of didn't get into a panic. And it's like the absence of the panic is really shocking to you somehow. You think, oh wow, I kind of coped with that quite well. And one lady that I worked with, she did some training with me. She has a diagnosis of bipolar, so you know, already she was in a position of quite a lot of suffering at, you know, certain times in her life. And she did the mindfulness training, and you know, she struggled at first and found it difficult, but then she really committed to it. She really went for it. She was doing daily practice. It was amazing. And then sort of a couple years later, she had a cancer diagnosis. And when I spoke to her on the phone, she said people couldn't believe how well I coped with this diagnosis. They were sort of expecting that I would go to pieces, as many people do. And she said, I really attribute that to the mindfulness training. Because I mean, it was a serious situation, of course. But was it going to be a serious situation with a whole bunch of reactivity on top of it, making it worse? Or could it just be a serious situation? And this experience in your life is different from when this is happening. Yeah, so this is where the mindfulness training works. It doesn't make bad things not happen to us. It's life, that things happen that are stressful and challenging and difficult. But it can help in terms of how do we react or respond in those situations. And my understanding is that a big part of that is, let's get those habits right out on the table in front of us and say, right, you, helpful, yes, keeping. You, not helpful, go. But throughout that process then, really important that we be gentle with ourselves, because we are basically learning. And again, the riding the bike example is a good one. Imagine that you have a child learning how to ride a bike. Maybe there's two. One child has somebody screaming at them every time they fall off. You're so rubbish! You should be able to ride that bike. Why can't you do it? La 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 la. The other person has a kind of gentle, nurturing, kindly, okay, fallen down, no problem, get back on the bike. Okay, yes, okay, scrape knee, no problem, back on the bike. Who do you think will learn quicker? Yeah? So when we're up here, looking at the habits, observing, trying to be mindful, practicing, we're learning. We've got our learner plates on. We're not going to get it straight away. Yeah, we're going to see habits. We're going to go, oh my God, I'm seeing that habit. I really would like to choose something different. Oh, but look, I'm still doing it. Oh, I'm still doing it. Yeah, that's the nature of the wiring in the brain. You know, some of these habits we've had for, what, 20, 30 years, depending on how old you are when you come to these practices. So really having that compassion towards ourselves, even when we see that we're being unskillful, even when we see that we're doing things that we think, I know this isn't good for me. You know, this is really when the compassion comes in. And so then this is the fifth part. So we've got pause, intention, attention, mental monkeys, habits, and then compassion. And this ability to be kind to ourselves when we are in the space of the mind, to be gentle with ourselves when we see that we're angry or sad or happy, or, you know, just being gentle really, is a critical part, I think, of the training. And certainly within the Buddhist traditions, you know, mindfulness and compassionate mind training always are woven together. They're not really separate. And that's been, I think, a criticism of some of the more secular trainings, which is people sort of saying, well, where's the heart bit, you know? Where's the heart-centered bit? Where's the compassion bit? But I suppose how I answer that is I say, well, look, every time you notice that the mind wanders, and you're able to just be gentle with that and say, oh, that's my mind, it's gone again. Hi, monkey. Thanks for coming out. Give you a big hug. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Not now. Come back. Every moment when you see, you pop up into this moment of awareness, you can be gentle and non-judgmental right at that moment. For me, it's like a little pipette of compassion. And those add up over time. Now, we can also look to some of the Buddhist literature as well for specific practices that have at their heart the development of an intention around gentleness and compassion. I myself, I'm interested in those, and I do use some of those. But thinking then about, well, how does the body help us with this learning? And how we relate to our bodies often can be, not for everybody, but sometimes when we examine it, we see that we're being quite hard on our bodies, quite striving, pushing, not taking care, not gentle. And, you know, some of the exercises that we do, you know, even a sort of a basic head turning left and right, you see people kind of going, Well, I just realized that I was like, you know, I was really trying to turn my head as far as it could go, and then I was thinking, why? Why am I doing that? You know, that's not gentle. Yeah, so sometimes the body can teach us about gentleness. You know, even just kind of developing habits of, you know, massaging or attending to the body. You know, if you haven't got money to go to a massage or a spa or a swim or something, you know, you have your hands to take care of your body. And even just doing this is a compassionate act, loosening the muscles or attending to the neck, often where there's tightness and kind of constriction. So that's it really. In the book there's chapters on each of those topics. They weave together some of the neuroscience information, a little bit of the mindfulness theory, and there's kind of one key exercise that tries to illustrate each of the points using the moving body. I've tried to weave through it some sort of everyday examples of things that you can just kind of try out to pepper your day with pauses, or to pepper your day with acts of gentleness, or start to think a little bit more deeply. What is my intention? How do I want to be in this world? How am I going to be gentle when I see that I didn't meet my intention? And yeah, it's there for people to enjoy and experiment with, and I'm very happy to.